Kasturi to introduce Dr. Saji. Thank you.
Very good morning to all of us present here. Welcome to the online lecture series brought to you by Inspector.
Hello.
Topic of today's online lecture series. Should I continue, sir?
Yes, please, Kasturi, go ahead.
The topic of this online lecture series is entitled Young-Minded Scholars Essential and UG and PG Students and bring about an awareness of the recent and ongoing studies in the field of academics. Today we have with us Dr. Saji Matthews as the chief speaker. Sir completed his MA, MPhil and PhD from the University of Hyderabad, taught at MS University of Baroda and Kannada University. Currently he works as an assistant professor in the School of Letters at Mahatma Gandhi University. He was on deputation to the Kerala State Higher Education Council, Trivandrum, as the research officer for some time. He has delivered more than 70 conference presentations, which include one at Oxford University, another at University of France. He has translated Basa Happy with Restaurant, a novel by Anand, into English. Sir has also contributed extensions to anthologies of Malayalam-based writing and Malayalam literature. He has published more than 25 research papers at national and international levels. Sir is the recipient of UGC Research Award for 2012 to 14. His areas of interest include cultural studies, translation studies, minority discourses, post-colonial studies, film studies, and Indian literature. So without further delay, I, on behalf of this section, welcome you, sir. The audience is requested to keep their microphones off throughout the lecture and not to share with friends. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And before I start, I would like to thank the organizers, particularly Dr. Vivek Singh and the Department of English at BHU for inviting me to deliver this lecture. And I think I understand that it's a frequently met forum, or you conduct these programs quite regularly. That's what I suppose. So you must have been already exposed to certain ideas that we'll be discussing as part of our talk today. Anyway, let me, without much delay, let me also get into the duty. And before we actually begin the talk, let me take a sudden anticipatory bail, in the sense, some of the examples for post-truth that I would be giving are mostly from outside India. That's purposefully done because I believe, I don't know how many of you agree with me, but I believe we are actually passing through frightening times, not necessarily because of COVID-19, I'm not referring to COVID-19, but certain other political issues and political authorities under which I believe we pass through frightening times, and therefore I am not courageous enough to use examples from India itself. So this is an anticipatory bail that I take. And when I discuss, I hope most of you would be able to make connections, find parallels, around your own or within our own societies. Okay. So I've been asked to speak about post-truth. Apparently, it's a concept or an idea that has come to the forefront of academic discussions quite recently. I hope I'm audible and clear. Am I? There is some disturbance from outside. That's why I'm asking you. You can hear
Yes,
me?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, pretty clear.
There is some construction going on in the, outside the department. That's all. Okay. So it's a word that has become quite popular nowadays, especially in recent times. And precisely because of that, precisely because it has come to the forefront of our discussions only recently, it's very difficult for anyone to speak about something that is still so new, very new or evolving and also controversial. It's a controversial topic as well. So it's very difficult for anyone, for that matter, to speak about it because post-truth is a concept, an idea, that is still evolving, that's still taking its shape in a way. Okay, so first of all, let me tell you that the idea of post-truth assumes a particular kind of point of view, which means it implies that facts and truth are endangered in today's political arena. In the contemporary political situation, not only in any particular society or in any particular country that I am talking about, but all over the world, in the contemporary situation, facts and truths are endangered. This is the primary assumption of the idea of post-truth, that these are things that are suppressed. Facts are suppressed. Truths are suppressed. So we may wonder whether the idea of post-truth is really all that new. When you speak about facts are suppressed, truths are suppressed, and all that, whether the idea of post-truth is all that really new, or isn't it just synonymous with propagandist activities in the past as well, when people would propagate for their own benefit, for their own interest, they would propagate things suppressing the realities and facts. So in that sense, you can say probably you can always ask a question like whether there is anything new in post-truth. Well, we can also say that there are some historical precedents for our current situation. That is true. Some historical precedents are there. But it would be wrong to reduce post-truth to something else. It would not be, appreciated, or it would be wrong, in other words, to reduce post-truth to propagandist, activities and such issues in the past. To say that facts are less important than feelings in shaping our beliefs about empirical matters seems quite new. Now, why I'm saying this? That is, facts, when you think about empirical realities, when you think about reality of society, when you think about, you have a number of such examples, especially in the context of vaccines. Now, COVID-19, we are all passing through that difficult time of COVID-19. And now in such a situation, when the vaccination started, the kind of news that was spread, or the kind of anti-campaigning that actually took place against vaccination in many places, or how so for many people, feelings were more important than facts. That's the point that I'm trying to raise here. So post-truth assumes that in a post-truth situation, facts are less important. Facts become less important than feelings. So what you feel about something becomes more important to understand reality, to understand a particular situation. Now, let me give you an example from America itself. That is an example, from the time of the former President Trump's, campaigning, election campaigning, before he became the president of America. So Donald Trump, all of us are familiar with Donald Trump, definitely. So when he was campaigning for elections, when he was, challenged, or Trump went on arguing in his public speeches that crime in America was on the rise, which means crime rate was increasing in America. And all that is because of the rulers. So Trump was projecting himself as capable of putting it down or bringing it down, in other words. So he went on campaigning that crime rate was increasing in America. Now, at this point, there was an interview with someone called Newt Gingrich. Gingrich was the surrogate of Trump at that time. Surrogate of Trump means Trump, if you noticed, Trump was afraid of the media. If you have noticed, even after he became the president, he rarely gave press conferences, except announcing certain decisions and all that. And we have parallels in different countries who would not face the media, who would not actually, conduct press conferences courageously and all that. Instead, they would, and somebody else would probably address the press. So Gingrich was one such person whom Trump used as a surrogate, instead of Trump. So Gingrich would, face the press. So there was an interview with Gingrich on CNN, and the reporter was Camerota. Camerota was the name of the reporter or the interviewer. Now, Camerota said, in the interview, she said, violent crime is down, the economy is ticking up. So that was her argument. And then Gingrich said, it is not down in the biggest cities. In the big cities, violent crime is not down. Then the reporter persisted. She continued to argue that violent crime, murder rate is down. It is down. That is what she was saying. And then Gingrich asked, then how come it's up in Chicago and up in Baltimore and up in Washington? That was the question he asked back. Then the reporter said, there are pockets where certainly we are not tackling murder. There are certain places, certain pockets, small pockets where crimes, cases of such instances do occur, of course. But that does not necessarily mean that crime rate is actually on the rise. Then Gingrich kept on arguing that violent crime across the country is on the rise. And then Gingrich says, the average American, I will bet you this morning, does not think crime is down, does not think we are safer. So he is immediately shifting to the feeling of average American, the feeling of people, the popular feeling. So he says the average American believes that it is on the rise. It is not very safe. Then she argues back, Camerota argues back, of course. And then the reporter said, no, that's just your view. That's just your view. It is a fact that we have the national FBI facts. So actual facts produced by FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation in America. So we have the facts with us. So when you have the facts, how do you go on campaigning? How do you go on saying that the crime rate is rising? Then Gingrich says, but what I said is also a fact. The current view is that liberals have a whole set of statistics that theoretically may be right, but it's not where human beings are. Now, the moment Camerota said, you have the facts about crime rate produced by FBI, he said, Gingrich said, you may have your facts. It's all produced by the liberals, the liberal groups. And that may be theoretically right, but that is not what people actually believe. This is what he says. But then the reporter replied, but what you're saying is, but hold on. You are saying liberals use these numbers. They use this sort of magic maths These are the FBI statistics. They are not liberal organization. They are a crime-fighting organization. So so the reporter says, no, don't talk about the liberals. I'm referring to the facts produced by FBI. It's an organization, crime-fighting organization, and nothing to do with liberals and whatever, and the traditionalists and all that. Then, and he kept on saying, people feel more threatened. Nowadays, people feel more threatened. And then the reporter said, they feel it, but the facts don't support it. As a political candidate, then Gingrich makes the final statement, as a political candidate, I'll go with how people feel and let you go with the theoreticians. This is what he says. I'll go with what people feel and let you go with the theoreticians. So general feeling, creating a particular kind of feeling and capitalizing on that feeling is one way of suppressing facts, in other words. In political campaigns, it continuously takes place. Everywhere, in election campaigns, it happens often. So what it implies is that truth is the first casualty in the establishment of the authoritarian state. Whenever a state, a political state, is on the road to establish an authoritarian kind of government, where if you raise your voice, you are immediately threatened. You become an anti-national suddenly. Such instances do occur in different places in the world, in different countries. So resistance, protest, or difference of opinion, these are never tolerated in such authoritarian system, or when you move towards that kind of a system. And in such a situation, the first casualty is truth. That is what post-truth would argue. And in the past, of course, we have faced serious challenges even to the notion of truth itself. But I mean, for example, you can say that there is no truth. We always believe, all of us say that there is no single truth. Truth is multiple and things like that. Okay. That is something which has happened in history. But one peculiar thing about contemporary society is that this challenge to truth is openly embraced as a strategy for the political subordination of reality. That's the fact about post-truth. Challenge to truth, earlier in the past, when we challenged single truths or the idea of objective reality, when we challenged it, it was to find out multiple truths or different perspectives. But here, in a post-truth situation, truth is challenged not to find out multiple truths or different perspectives, but truth is challenged as a strategy for the subordination of reality, for the subordination or suppression of reality for political gains, particularly for political gains. And now this is where we need to really understand actually how earlier challenges to truth actually differ from what we are now discussing about suppression of truth, suppression of reality, and so on. So what is striking about the idea of post-truth is not just that truth is being challenged. That is not the more important aspect of post-truth, but that it is being challenged as a mechanism for asserting political dominance. Truth is being challenged, truth is being suppressed, truth is consciously, sidelined for what? As a mechanism, as a strategy for asserting political dominance, to remain in power, to acquire that kind of a domination over the rest of the society or everybody. Political domination becomes the aim of suppression of truth. Now, the phenomenon of post-truth actually gained public attention in November 2016 when the Oxford Dictionary named it 2016's Word of the Year. It was named as the Word of the Year by Oxford Dictionary in 2016. That's when actually the term itself suddenly came to the forefront. People started talking about it immediately when the Oxford Dictionary actually declared it the Word of the Year. Now, here, when they talked about post-truth as the Word of the Year, they underlined that the prefix post in the word post-truth, the prefix post is meant to indicate not so much the idea that we are past truth in the temporal sense. That is not the idea, that we have passed the age of truth already in the temporal sense, in terms of time, as in post-war, probably. You study, I hope most of you are from English literature. So you speak about post-war poetry and all that, probably. So in that case, you mean war is past, it's over. Okay. It is not in that sense. It's not in that temporal sense that post is used in post-truth, but in the sense that truth has been eclipsed, that it is irrelevant. This is what very clearly Oxford Dictionary, actually states. It is not that we have passed the age of truth, but that truth has been eclipsed. Truth has been eclipsed, and that it is irrelevant. Truth is no longer irrelevant. Now, I know our topic is post-truth and social media, and I'll come to that, how social media plays a major role in creating this context or in eclipsing truth, in making it irrelevant. I'll speak about that a bit later. And many people see post-truth as part of a growing international trend where some try to bend reality to fit their opinions rather than the other way around. So in order to fit their opinions, people try to bend realities. They consciously bend realities. It means that post-truth assumes that facts can always be shaded, selected, and presented within a political context that favors one interpretation of truth over another. So, facts in a post-truth age or in a post-truth context, facts are always shaded, very carefully selected, and then presented in a particular kind of political context which favors one interpretation of truth over another. But as I told you, it has to be distinguished from the questioning of truth, single truth and all that. I'm not going into those details right now. So basic assumption within post-truth is that it is telling a falsehood with an intent to deceive. Telling a falsehood with an intent to deceive. We are attempting to deceive another person, even though we know that what we are saying is untrue. So we are very conscious. We know that what we are saying is untrue. We know it. So with this consciousness, with this conviction, we are telling a lie. We are with an intention to deceive someone else. So by definition, there is an idea of lie implicated within post-truth, of course. But when our intention is to manipulate someone into believing something that we know to be untrue, we have moved away from mere interpretation of facts into their falsification. Again, I'm trying to distinguish between interpretation of things and post-truth suppression of reality. So in interpretation of things, when we look at multiple realities, multiple truths and things like that, we are not simply manipulating someone into believing something that we know to be true, untrue. We ourselves know that it is not true. It is false. It is a lie. But we want others to believe in this. So consciously deceiving someone. That is very different from inquiring into the multiplicities of truths or in finding alternative perspectives That is very different from post-truth situation. So when a person's beliefs are threatened by an inconvenient fact, sometimes it is preferable to challenge the fact, right? So you believe, all of us have our own beliefs. Most of us may believe in God. Most of us may believe in our own religions. We may, practice certain rituals and all that. So many things. Or we may have our own strong convictions about life. But when a fact, it could be a scientific fact or a socially proved fact, whatever it is, when a fact challenges our beliefs, something that we believe in very strongly, when actual fact challenges it, it becomes an inconvenient fact. It's an inconvenient fact for us. Then what is our immediate reaction? Our immediate reaction usually is not to accept it. Usually it's not. If you strongly believe in something, if you practice something, if you practice a ritual continuously, and then somebody comes forward and tells you that's stupid, there is no point in that, it's utter nonsense, there is no scientific evidence for it, or there is nothing that can actually prove it to be useful, things like that, and people put forward facts against our belief. And then the immediate reaction would be to reject that factual presentation. We would naturally reject it because this is something that we strongly believe in. This can happen either at a conscious level or an unconscious level. This rejection can take place. But the point is that this sort of post-truth relationship to facts occurs only when we are seeking to assert something that is more important to us than the truth itself. So this kind of post-truth relationship to facts, how you react to a fact, that can occur only when we attempt to assert something that is more important to us than truth itself. So for us, what is more important is not truth. Instead, our belief or our practice or our custom, the custom that we practice. So when that becomes more important for us than truth itself, then we tend to reject the facts. So post-truth is not so much a claim that truth does not exist as that facts are subordinate to our political point of view. So how does post-truth operate in political situations? Political points of view acquire more importance and more significance over and above actual truths and realities, social realities and truths. So political points are placed at a higher, or political points of view are placed at a higher level. So post-truth, in short, amounts to a kind of ideological supremacy. It gains a certain kind of ideological supremacy by which its practitioners try to compel someone into believing in something, whether there is good evidence for it or not. And this is a recipe for political domination. This is how political domination happens nowadays. How social media is used by political parties, for example, to force you into believing something that is untrue. Continuous production of such materials, and you are bombarded with such materials in your WhatsApp, I'm sure, often, consciously produced by specific political groups in order to make you believe in something. Okay, a lot of things, particularly when I can think of a recent example or a recent context is when the clash between Israel and Palestine recently took place. I don't know whether that was the case with your place also, but here that was quite evident. In Kerala, a lot of anti-campaigning against Palestine, and which are actually untrue, against facts. These were against the facts. without any cross-checking. People started sharing it. People started spreading it all around, and you begin to believe in those news or those statements about Palestine. So those were actually against the truth, against facts. This can happen against a particular community sometimes, specific communities, specific regions, and all that. It can happen in many ways. So you are made to believe in those things when they are continuously passed to you, when you are bombarded with such messages on social media often. So this is why is it done? This is for political domination of one group over others. So the idea of post-truth has seen a recent emergence, particularly with the US presidential election that I referred to earlier, Trump's election campaigns. That is when everybody started actually using this word in a very significant manner. And all this has been, increased, or all this has been enhanced by recent changes in the media landscape, particularly how we use the media, not only social media, but all kinds of media. In the past, you had actually an explosion of science denial. Science denial was a characteristic of, or it is a characteristic of post-truth situation, you can say. Science denial means denial of science. So you deny scientific vaccines are of no use, and I will produce things and give you. Those vaccines are actually better. I can make such a statement, and I can also propagate that. And so you deny the validity of science. How do you do that? You can do that in different ways. You can do that in different ways using the social media and media in general, of course. You can do that. You can do that by saying that everything that I practice has a scientific, scientific reason also. That is also another way of denying science. That you say there was internet in ancient India. Okay. There are different such ways in which you can deny science. You can openly deny science. You can also say my belief, my practice, my custom has a scientific base. That is another way of denying science. So in different ways you can. That's why I said post-truth situation. Before this actually arises, you have a very largely spread denial of science. In relation to many topics, you can find that. Topics like climate change, for example, vaccines, evolution, evolution, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. In all these areas, you find a lot of science denial. There are many people. But mind you, these are all those people who deny science are not scientists. That is the irony and funny part of it. They are not scientists. They are actually people who have no idea of science. People who are not, science educated, in fact. They are the ones who actually deny the arguments of climate change, the arguments in favor of vaccines, or or theories of evolution. They deny all this. So if you're very strong, if you have very strong faith, you believe in God, whichever religion you belong to, it doesn't matter. You have to somehow deny that Darwin was wrong, right? But we may not have enough, materials for that. But you continue to deny. You put evolution under suspicion. And whenever you come across some statement like, Darwin has not been entirely proved, or or Darwin is not beyond doubt. Some such statements, if you come across, suddenly you copy it and spread it around. And why do you do that? Because your feeling is more important to you than truth. As I told you earlier, your belief is more important than truth. So science denial becomes a primary requisite for post-truth situation. And this happens. This happens because we have inbuilt cognitive bias. Cognitive bias is something like, our biases that we have in our mind. We grow up with certain biases about people, about our beliefs and practices, about everything around us. So cognitive bias. So how do you change the cognitive bias you have? In the past, um, so in the past, there was different ways in which you could change cognitive biases. For example, in the past, in village situations and all that, people would sometimes, particularly in my place, this was the practice, and I mean, this used to take place in the past. I don't know how it is in your villages and in your places, but people would go to a small tea shop in the morning, not necessarily because they don't have tea at home. Definitely they have, but they would go to a tea shop in the morning, sit there, have a cup of tea, and then read the newspaper there or listen to the radio news, mostly radio news, listen to radio news, and then debate about the issues and all that. Okay. These are not educated people, ordinary people, very ordinary farmers even. So they would sit there, many people would sit there and debate about it. And there is a possibility of exchanging ideas there. Now, what do you do in order to get news and all that? You sit in your drawing room, switch on the TV, and you move to a news channel. And you find that this channel is reporting things that I don't like, or things that question my beliefs, my political beliefs, my religious beliefs, my cultural beliefs, and all that. So what do? You take the remote, change the channel. That's it. As simple as that. No exchange of idea taking place as such. So your cognitive bias is protected, very carefully protected. We live in news silos, in other words. We live in news silos. So you don't want to. So what happens? You belong to a particular group, WhatsApp group you have. I'm also supposed to speak about social media, right? So you belong to a particular WhatsApp group, and you find that many people who post things there in the group are not in agreement with my beliefs and my practices. So you exit the group, as simple as that. Or if somebody questions the majority's belief in the group, you remove him or her, right? If you don't like somebody's statement in your Facebook page, you unfriend him, right? You can unfriend. No dialogue. Actually, there is no dialogue taking place there. So you can remove, and you can be part of you can be very selective about joining hands with people who share your ideologies and your perspectives. And you become part of that particular group. So your cognitive biases are continuously supported. Your cognitive biases are not challenged with evidence or with facts. Now, this is very different from traditional societies. In traditional societies, at least people had such occasions to debate and enter into dialogue in different ways. They used to find methods to do that. That does not mean I'm not trying to valorize traditional society that everything was fine and good. Well, that is not my point. But cognitive biases were, some way or the other ameliorated, or it was there was a chance, there was a possibility of questioning your own cognitive biases sometimes. But with the advent of social media, even television also, this is what has happened. You don't want to watch a channel that is run by a different political party, for example. I know such cases. So you don't want to watch them at all. Whatever they report, you don't want. And if you strongly believe in a particular political party, then you switch on their channel alone and listen to their perspective. So your cognitive biases are never challenged. It's never questioned. This is what I meant by news silos. Okay, we live in news silos, in other words. This also contributes to the production of a post-truth society, where truths would be, or realities and facts would be consciously suppressed. Okay. Let me. The rise of social media, in other words, has facilitated this informational free for all, information free for all. It has definitely facilitated this possibility of giving information to everybody. With fact and opinion now presented side by side on the internet, who knows what to believe anymore? Now, fact and opinion, you don't differentiate between facts and opinion anymore. This is one problem with post-truth situation. You can no longer differentiate between facts and opinion. So what you get on social media, sometimes, especially on WhatsApp, what you forward continuously, most of them are opinions, not facts. But we are not able to distinguish between facts and opinions. Now, what has happened to print media recently after the emergence of televisions and all that? Media capitalism, you can say. Now, after the emergence of media capitalism, what happened is that if you have noticed, if you have done some work in that area, maybe inquire about it in your own language. How many newspapers used to exist in the past? Okay, in your own regional languages. Okay, newspapers and little magazines that used to exist in the past, and how, with the advent of giants in print field, how these various newspapers and various little magazines disappeared. So they control, these giants in the print field control the entire media or print journalism, in other words. So what happens? That reduces the possibility of multiple voices. That reduces the possibility of multiple voices. So you are forced to believe in what 2 or 3 newspapers actually spread or what they actually circulate. You are forced to believe in those things as truths. So the advent of giants in print media or in print journalism has actually created this particular situation where you do not have access to multiple viewpoints and perspectives. So you are forced to believe in whatever they represent, whatever they print, in other words. And when you come to social media, what happens is you are no longer able to distinguish between facts and opinion. So with the fall of the reputation of the mainstream media, those with a stake in distributing propaganda no longer need worry about getting others to tell their side of the story anymore. So the mainstream media has fallen, in the sense, that has been reduced to a few of them, and then it's very easy for people with political power to propagate whatever they want to do it. And it is more importantly, with the advent of social media, those people in power have their own media outlets. That is another very significant thing. Their own media outlets. So every political party would have media outlets. They have their own websites. They have their own, software professionals to construct, truths. To construct truths and spread it on WhatsApp and other social media. And then what happens? They can directly even contact you. So I receive emails from people in my inbox, directly in my inbox, from various ministries. I hope Many of you have received such emails, right? So directly from the government's, various ministries that I mean, propagating what they did or what they are doing and things like that. So you can directly contact individuals. That is the situation of social media or internet with the advent of internet. So the possibility of propagating things they want to do, things they want to propagate directly to the individual is possible. So you have your own media outlets, you have your own Facebook accounts, you have your own Twitter accounts, and all that. So this is the situation of social media, where truths are consciously suppressed and falsehood or lies are spread continuously all around us. So so if we get our news from social media, we can tune out those sources we don't like. That's also possible. You get such links, right? News on social media also. In Facebook, within your Facebook, you get links. And if you don't like certain links and they're reporting, you can tune out. You can close. I don't want any more notification from this website, from this particular channel. I don't want. So Facebook would stop giving you notification from them. And that is very similar to what I told you earlier. Just as we unfriend people who disagree with our political opinions. So this kind of a situation, this kind of political situation, where you cannot really distinguish between truth and opinion, or facts and opinion. And that has actually created. So the advent of social media has greatly generated a context of post-truth or post-truth situation, where you are not able to distinguish between facts and falsehood, or facts and reality. Okay. So fake news, therefore, becomes a significant aspect of post-truth. Fake news. The problem of fake news is that it is intimately related to the phenomenon of post-truth. Social media has played an important role in facilitating post-truth. That's why I say social media has played an important role in facilitating post-truth. The electronic dissemination of information can be used to spread lies, but it can also be used to spread truth. That is possible. So if we have ideals worth fighting for, let us fight for the ideals and not for lies. That's the idea. So you have actually, I would like to wind up the discussion right now so that we can have a discussion. And you have a number of websites, in fact, which can actually tell you whether a particular news is true or not. OpenAI is one such, an artificial intelligence research group. OpenAI is an artificial intelligence research group co-founded by, the billionaire Elon Musk. And it has demonstrated, it has actually demonstrated a piece of software that can produce authentic looking fake news articles after being given just a few pieces of information, mind you. So they have shown how it is possible. They produced a software. So you give certain pieces of information into this program, and it can actually generate articles, authentic looking articles. When you read it, you will not suspect its originality. Authentic looking fake articles and fake news it can generate. So which means we live in at a time when such softwares are available for the production of post-truth realities or fake news. It's very easy. You don't need to sit down and type out everything and construct fake news. Software will do it for you. That's the situation in which we live. There are also many other websites that actually check whether a particular news is fake or not. So it is a post-truth is a very difficult and very important situation for us, because our recent history tells us that fake news menace has led to dozens of mob lynching in different parts of our country. Remember, fake news, the spread of fake news over social media. And in many cases, if you check, you can find it. Maybe many cases of mob lynchings that happened in many places were all created by fake news, the spreading of fake news. And at the same time, you are familiar with how different political parties used fake news for their own gain at the time of elections. Even recently, I don't want to actually internationally, an international organization that has studied the production of fake news in India during election days has accused one or two people of using social media for spreading fake news, or at least one particular political party for using it more. And I don't want to name that particular political party here in the open forum. If you can contact me personally, maybe I can do that. But otherwise, I don't want to do that. I mean, they have actually listed. That organization has actually listed the photographs and pictures that they morphed, edited, and used for campaigning, the kind of news that certain news pieces that were created by such political parties and spread across on social media platforms. And they have listed most of them, and many such instances. And they have said who has actually used it more and for what. As I told you in the beginning, for political domination. And the attempts were not very futile. With these words, I conclude my discussion. I was actually trying to just, give you a few ideas or points around the idea of post-truth rather than approaching it philosophically and theoretically. And thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Saji. And it's going to be 1 hour. It's like we started at exactly at 11, and it's going to be 12. And I know that there are students who have a class. So unfortunately, which we don't do, we cannot engage the interactions because like it's a Thursday and people have classes and their semester is going to be end. I mean, because I could see the questions, but I'm just concerned that what I'm supposed to do. Dalai sir, what do you think? How to go with that?
Those who have classes, they can quit, but others can join in the discussions. They can ask questions, no problem.
Yeah, no, because I want you to give also this time to speak and comment and give it up. Thanks.
But let the students, pose their question, raise their questions, and then I will wrap up.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So, Dalai sir, you will take over it then further.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. So, students who have classes, they can leave the lecture and join the classes. Others can continue and raise your questions to Dr. Matthew. Yeah.
Okay. So, Kasturi, could you please read question for?
I can read it. I can read it. I can read it. Okay.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah. Thanks for such an insight. I doubt cognitive biases, ideological biases, religious bias, political bias, and the sense of heterogeneous society and people of different identities, race, ethnicity, and cultural beliefs of a particular country. All these facts and realities promote the post-truth on the hands of the masses. Okay. Yes, I was also trying. That's a statement made by Manjeev Kashyap. So I think that's what I was also trying to say, the cognitive bias, ideological bias. And you can have any number of biases like that, religious bias, caste bias, all that. definitely they play a significant role in promoting post-truth situations. Of course, I agree with that. Then, so what's your opinion on the role of big techs in the dissemination of fake news, as it has come to light that hateful, abusive posts are more likely to go viral on social media platforms? How can such big techs be held accountable in India, where the state is trying to force these platforms to be a surveillance tool? Okay, I don't know if the big techs are more responsible, but I think one of the, one thing that has happened with the advent of internet and social media is that this is a question raised by Divya Mathur. Okay, so one thing that has happened after the advent of internet and social media and all that is that you don't need to be a big tech actually to to spread hateful, abusive posts. You can actually you can what do you say? You can have your own platforms. Your own platforms. So internet is available, and you can create your own groups and all that. So I don't know if big techs are to be solely held responsible for this. I wonder. I'm not so much for that, but yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Matthew, I think what Divya wants to know is basically how people prefer, sensational news.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying. What is the mental, that cognitive perception of people to go for sensational news, not really fresh media.
Of course. Sensational because, and if you have noticed, even we ourselves, when we get a particular kind of news on WhatsApp, okay, what are the things that we actually forward? If that is something that goes against my belief and my cognitive bias or my political bias, my religious bias, I may not forward it, right? I may not forward it anymore. So how something becomes sensational for me is because I don't consider, sorry, because I don't necessarily share their political beliefs and religious beliefs and all that. So we all have the tendency, actually we all have a tendency to sensationalize things. We all do that, except when it's about our own political beliefs, religious beliefs, and all that. Otherwise, we all have this tendency, and we forward it, we speak about it, we spread it more without verifying whether there is any truth in it, whether there is any fact in it. I think that's what happens. But I can't really account for this nature of human beings, sensationalizing nature of human beings. I can't really say why. I mean, psychologists might be able to, answer that better. Then Kishan Misra said the whole idea of fact and truth with capital F and T respectively have been collapsed in the postmodern. Of course. Okay, so please elaborate the statement when it is said that post-truth eclipses the truth and fact or distorts the. Okay, now what we mean is, that's why I was trying to distinguish between questioning of objective reality and what we mean by truth here. The truth in post-truth, when we speak about truth does not mean that ultimate only truth, single truth. That is not what we mean. But more, truth is more and aligned with facts, actually. Now, we cannot say facts are, questioned. You can have facts, but when you question, even in postmodern situation, in postmodern discourses, when you, I hope Ishan Misra is there? I hope he's. Okay. Yes, you are there. Okay. So in postmodern discourses, when we question objective truth, objective reality, or the whole idea of truth itself, what we mean is we are not trying to say that facts no longer exist. We are actually trying to say that interpretation of facts is what we call truth. Only when you interpret a particular fact, you arrive at something called truth. And you can arrive at truths in different ways. So there is no objective truth but fact is still there. For example, that's why we are talking about rewriting history, for example. For example, you have multiple kinds you have Marxist historians, you have subaltern historians, you have different feminist historians, and they are all doing what? They are all analyzing the same facts, probably, or facts which were not looked at, but they are arriving at different kinds of interpretations. And precisely because there are different interpretations, you cannot speak about an objective truth, an objective history, or one specific single history of a particular society. It's not possible. So similarly, textual interpretation. Multiple interpretations are possible, but textual statements still remain, or textual writings still remain. So this is all what we mean in post-truth. When we say truth, we are not speaking about an ultimate truth. We are speaking about how facts are consciously being suppressed. Actual experiences or actual instances in society are suppressed in order to create a version of truth. They suppress it and spread something entirely new. So it does not go against the postmodern discourse as such. We are not saying that there is a particular single ultimate truth in it. No. Instead, actual specific social instances, social facts or political facts, they are consciously suppressed in order to spread lies, and through which certain groups can attain positions of power and domination. I don't know if I clearly responded to you. Okay, I received another.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much. Okay. Could you please provide reference to understand this? Okay. How do you see the role of language being sandwiched between truth and lies? How reliable the language we read and listen becomes authentic? Of course, exactly. That's precisely the problem of postmodern times and the advent of internet. That's why I was saying it's very difficult to distinguish between facts and opinion, right? Which is a fact and which is just an opinion is a question. And in social media, there is no such difference. You read all kinds of things. I mean, on Facebook, when you open, you find somebody's cooking experiments. You see its photograph, you see the description of it, your friends' cooking experiments under lockdown, okay, along with an important news piece. Both have equal status there, and you really don't distinguish between both. Whatever you really can't actually distinguish between opinions and facts. So this is a predicament. That's a situation, particular kind of situation of postmodern times. Harold Pinter, in his Nobel Prize lectures, opined that media who are busy spreading the lies that they have been consigned to a no man's land from which they may never return. US. Okay, fine. Yeah, I totally, agree with that, of course. Okay, somebody else had asked a question. What was that? Gopal Kumar, although this term post-truth is the recent development. Of course, Gopal Kumar Chowdhury's observation is totally true. It's not. I was not trying to say that post-truth is a construction of Oxford Dictionary. No, actually, the word was used, but it was more widely used in 2016. That's why 15 and 16. That's why Oxford Dictionary termed it as the word of the year in 2016. That's all. It is not their finding. It is not Oxford Dictionary's finding actually. And coming to the second part of your observation, that's why I said post-truth is not it's not a reason one, but of course, but it is, its possibilities have increased without any limitation, with the advent of social media. That's why we are increasingly aware of it. Everybody is speaking about it because we are always exposed to the realities of post-truth or experiences of post-truth nowadays. That's why everybody is talking about it. That does not mean such situations did not exist in the past. It did exist, of course. It always existed. In fact, I mean, in the 20th century, if you can say, what was Hitler doing? Hitler was actually creating a post-truth situation through Goebbels, who spread lies on radio always, right? Every day, people were forced to listen to the radio. And Hitler was, I don't know, when I say that, I feel like saying something else, making such certain comparisons, but I don't want to do that right now. So everybody was forced, all people, he would address the Germans in a very endearing manner, of course. And then the people were expected to listen to Hitler's speech, and which Goebbels would probably draft for him or do it for him, whatever. And now his speeches were full of lies. And there I end the statement because I'm tempted, really tempted to make comparisons, but I don't want to do that right now. Okay, so that's it.
Now you have the last question from KC Singh, Dr. Matthew.
Yes. Okay. I want to further Divya's question that the big techs have unregulated control over data. Google has the Discover feature which provides the news according to one's cognitive biases. They also trace our search history. They vigorously follow people who search for how to make bombs, etc. So don't you think that these big companies like Google and Facebook, which practice monopoly, have more role to play in post? Yes, they do have. I'm not denying that. Definitely, they do have. But at the same time, what I was trying to say is they are not the only ones responsible. They do have a lot of monopoly, and they would sometimes remove your statements or your photographs or your if they don't like it. Definitely they do have, and they have such a great control, definitely. So social media, the advent of social media in general has created a situation of post-truth. They do have a great role to play. I totally agree with that. I don't deny that, actually. Nor did I deny that point in even when Divya Mathur was actually raising the issue initially. So I'm not denying. I agree with both of you completely.
Okay, I think we are done with the Q&A session. Or are there any questions to be asked? Yeah. Vivek, are you there? Vivek? Okay. I think it was indeed a very enlightening lecture by Dr. Saji Mathew. It is a proud privilege for me personally because Saji has been my immediate senior back in the University of Hyderabad, and I know his expertise in the field of literature. He is one of the early translators in India, particularly when translation was trying to establish itself as a kind of academic practice and genre or discipline in India itself. Dr. Mathew basically started his lecture by clarifying the ideas associated with this newly arisen concept and practice called post-truth. And then he tried to give the origin or the etymological emergence of this word post-truth, particularly mentioning about how in 2016 post-truth would emerge or would be included in the Oxford English Dictionary. And then he spoke about the praxis of post-truth, the way post-truth as a tool, post-truth as a concept is used in the domain of media, particularly the social medias, the electronic medias, also the print medias. What we understand from Professor Matthew's lecture is how we have a new kind of truth, unlike the truth that our schoolmen, the philosophers, would attempt to define truth in a transcendental, in a philosophical concept. We have a new truth, which is more political, which can be twisted, which can be reduced, which can be subordinated for not the sake of truth itself, but for our own use. So post-truth is basically the subordinated or the twisted truth for political purpose. And by political, I do not mean merely politics as we see, but the politics embedded in culture, in education, in religion, in everything. Post-truth is present everywhere. He also spoke about, or what we understand further from his lecture is how truth is basically or often eclipsed or made completely irrelevant in our understanding of reality or truth in a more political sense, again, not in the philosophical sense. Okay, and by trying to convey that we have a newer kind of truth, like we have a newer kind of oxygen, industrial oxygen being converted into consumable or inhalable, oxygen. Truth and oxygen are quite significant for our survival, not living, for survival. But unfortunately, both truth and oxygen are now twisted and made political. And that is the crux of the matter. It is not just truth, but what is worrying our society, worrying us, is the twisting, the eclipse, the irrelevance of truth. That is post-truth. The post-truth basically doesn't mean to one particular historical period after the truth, as he said, but post-truth is both a newer concept and a tool indeed, like there were so many questions, how it is being used for different purposes. So to wrap up, I would say Dr. Matthew's lecture was based on how there is a production, distribution, and consumption of truth / post-truth in our world. And it is worrying, it is blameworthy, precisely because the way it has brought havoc on all of us in our personal life, in our bedroom, in our professional life, in our working spaces. So life has become intolerable, not because of the problems per se, but the way the realities, the truths of the problems are disseminated or circulated amongst the society. And that is why we felt that, Vivek might have felt, intersection might have felt that we need to listen to, a lecture about post-truth. And we definitely had a good lecture and very enlightening lecture by Professor Matthew. What is interesting about Professor Matthew is, Saji, can you, what is interesting about Matthew is, the way he delivered the lecture. In fact, I tell my students, Saji, here, that it's not about knowledge. It's not about knowing. It's not about class. It's not about your lecture, but the way you present the lecture, that matters much. And this is what is quite common to scholars. And let me be open, particularly from South and from Bengal. There could be other scholars also, and I really admire it. See, one can open directly with how post-truth came, like I have done in my article, which is available, okay? That how it came in 2016 and all, and how there are books by Ivan Davis, how we have arrived at this peak bullshit. Post-truth is basically compared as bullshit, literally. There is a book called Post-Truth, How We Have Arrived Peak Bullshit and What We Can Do by Ivan Davis. So we can begin with this, but it's a lecture for students, So wonderful opening of the lecture, and then coming to the crux of the lecture and also winding up with examples from the real life. So it was not a mere lecture, but I would say, and if you remember, Anthony Gramsci, Dr. Matthew is an organic intellectual. What does it mean? What he was saying is basically related to how we live. And he has combined perfectly his lecture, or the words as we say, with the reality to avoid the post-truth of his lecture. Unlike my background, you see the beach, it's a post-truth basically. I'm at my home, but you think that I am holidaying somewhere, okay? So that's the reality. But I have my own reservation. Back in our academic environment, we don't leave our seniors, no matter what he is. So here is my question to Dr. Saji, I have reservation against your, defense of science. Particularly
Okay.
when science has failed to deliver, not only during COVID times, but in other historical events as well. One, two, there are also discourses about the shortcomings of science. Let's say Thomas Kuhn's, the structure of scientific revolution. You have Karl Mannheim's, the sociology of science. So if science itself is a social construction, if science itself is ideologically manipulated or maneuvered, how can we then rely on science, right? And look at the example of even, that World Health Organization, doctors are now fumbling to declare COVID initially as pandemic or not. And the ideas about medicine, which medicine works better, or why is black fungus, green fungus, or, white fungus there. So in that case, how can we blindly follow science? That's my question. Maybe you can answer, Saji, just a second. And I think there is an essay, and most of my students have read, those who have done BA here, an essay called Worship of the Wealthy by G.K. Chesterton. And there, Chesterton is talking about what Saji was hinting at, that, this exaggeration, or what is it called, eology, or eologism, is not something common to modern society. It has been there from the old times, but there is a difference, which obviously I'm not going to talk about it. And Chesterton also talks about the manners or the methods of such charlatanism or such fake news in his own times, right? So I think Pooja Singh, you can read that essay again, called Worship of the Wealthy by G.K. Chesterton, where you will find how Chesterton was one of the first people to talk about how post-truth, exaggeration, eology, fake news have crept into our literature particularly. He was not talking about, yes, he was talking about journalism as well. But nevertheless, it was an enlightening lecture. Saji, you can talk to, address my question.
Yeah, sure. Actually, Delai, I was what I was trying to say is I'm not I would not say that science is the final word or science is the last word. Whatever scientific understanding is expected to be the last word on something. But my point is that that's why somewhere while I was talking about that, I said people who question science, scientists themselves question the results of science often. So they modify, and as it's good that you mentioned Kuhn, because he himself talks about the paradigm shift, right? Paradigm shifts occur within science. For example, Newtonian physics is not the physics that we have today, with the advent of quantum mechanics and all that. So definitely, that is revisions and rethinking done by scientists themselves. Now, my point is, what I was trying to say is, scientific, at least for whatever is available, whatever knowledge, scientific knowledge is available, those available scientific knowledge, that available scientific knowledge is questioned in post-truth times. Those things are questioned by scientists. It is questioned by predominantly non-scientists to suit their own ideological beliefs
Mhm.
or to further and promote their own ideological beliefs. That's what I was trying to say. That does not mean that whatever scientific knowledge is available now and that is the final thing that is entirely true. That's not the point. Scientists do revise it, they do question it definitely. But the how our immediate cognitive bias makes us question or deny scientific facts when those facts are presented to us, and if those facts do not agree with my own personal beliefs, my customs and things like that, so I question them. No, it can't be, and I find out explanations and justifications for it. And when I find out explanations and justifications, what I do is I indirectly say that there is a scientific basis for my belief, for my practice, for my custom, etc. And this is what I was actually referring to. I was not saying that science is the final thing or science can explain everything. Science cannot. Science cannot explain everything, or at least so far it has not been able to explain everything, definitely. I totally agree with you on that point. And then another thing is, I wanted to add something to what you were saying. You were talking about the impact of post-truth situation in our bedroom and things like. When you went on saying that, I also wanted to add one more word, that is in our kitchen too, because okay, because we know very clearly how social media spreading WhatsApp message caused the death of a person, an innocent person, a few years ago, if you remember. And ultimately, it was proved that what he had in his kitchen was not what was alleged, actually. Right? We have seen that too. So that's why
but
post
but
truth.
but there are other sides also,
Yeah.
I have been cooking a lot of new dishes from YouTube, learning from YouTube,
Yeah, that's
starting from Kerala.
definitely. Oh, of course. What I'm saying is how it can cause
Yeah,
damage
yeah,
to people and society and all that.
true,
So
true.
you can add to your list. You can add kitchen too.
Okay, so yeah, so I think it's time that we call it a day. And before we really depart, I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Saji Matthew for devoting or rather sparing his valuable time for the Department of English, Faculty of Arts, Banaras Hind University, and for the students, assembled here under the auspices as is of Intersections, the brainchild of some of my young colleagues, of which Vivek Singh is there, Rahul Chaturvedi is also there. I think he should have joined, but maybe he's busy. But nevertheless, Dr. Saji Matthew, thank you very much for coming up and addressing our students. And I'm sure the students will ask for more lectures in future. So with this anticipation, we come to the end of this lecture. Now, it is left to Vivek if you want to say some final words. Thank you, Saji.
And
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think enough has already been said, and the topic which we thought to speak today or we thought to engage today is endless, right? Because we know from where to start and where to end. I mean, so like even the like, what is the truth? That is a ontological question, the first hand, and then moving towards epistemological question, what has been happening today, and the beautiful thing is the way it has been used or misused by people. So the good part is that from well, like just to tell you, Saji, because other students who are here they already know what intersections do. Is this only purpose that we invite people across India? The purpose is that, but obviously thanks to COVID, right? I mean, thanks to COVID in the sense that we can easily call people and they can come over here through virtual mode and they can speak to our students, not limiting to what Dalai sir thinks, what Vivek sir thinks, what other people think, but what is happening around India and across India as well, right? Or let's say other parts of as well. So, and thankfully that with the license in ad that people from Banaras Hindu University too have started thinking and arguing in the same fashion and other parts of country do, right? So that is why they invite people just so that we can exchange and we can, and it's also the another purpose is that when we started this forum is Saji that I was discussed that there's something like every just 2 minutes I will not take much that every place has its own aura, right? But the purpose is that we should not limit to what we have, right? But rather we should extend our knowledge. We should think multidisciplinary approach. We should know what is happening around the world, right? And needless to say that I'm sure Dalai sir witnessed because he's in the research interview committee. The people who come for interview who are here, who are interviewed, they come with the different proposals. So initially we were stuck with the diaspora things, but now we have different discourse which are being discussed by our own students. So that's the purpose. And Saji, I'm thankful people like you who are here that they give our time because we know that, like I said very frankly, people are not ready to give their own time. That too for free. Whatever we mean by free, right? So no one is ready to give their time, but I'm very delighted. I'm happy to say that it is because people like you who put effort in academic discourse, we are still alive with this some engagement. So thank you, students. Thank you, Dalai sir, and I mean, I cannot express thanks to you. I'm overwhelmed.